Hello everyone and welcome to this Chamber Low Carbon Live Lunch and Learn, Reducing Bills and Carbon Footprint. I'm Chris Gibbons. I'm one of the Energy and Environmental Advisors with the Chamber Low Carbon Programme hosting today's session for you. Today we have Hannah Drake of Enerlytic speaking to you to give her expert insights on today's topic. Before I formally hand over, just a little bit of housekeeping and information on Chamber Low Carbon. Today's session is being recorded and will be available again on our YouTube channel. All participants are on mute. For questions, please see the Q&A facility at the bottom of your screen. You can submit questions at any time here during the session. We will read them out, but equally, if you'd like to read your own question out at the end of the session, please indicate when you type your question in, and we'll unmute you. If you'd like to network and let people know who you are, we also have the chat function that's open and available, so you can let the room know a little bit more about yourself should you feel that you want to. A little bit of an introduction to Chamber Low Carbon and then Hannah when I hand over to her. For those of you who are new to us today, we're East Lancashire Chamber of Commerce in partnership with North and West Lancashire Chamber of Commerce, Business-Wise Solutions and Boost. We're a part-funded European Union Regional Development Fund programme. That's a £6 million programme, and we provide a suite of free services to help businesses improve their energy and environmental efficiencies, introduce on-site renewable generation, and we assist you in saving money and recording your carbon footprint. The programme also helps Lancashire businesses that are developing new low carbon technologies to bring these products to market, facilitate them being manufactured in Lancashire, and to help them find demonstrator sites, hopefully within the Lancashire region also. And now for Hannah before I hand over. Hannah is the founder and CEO of Enerlytic. Bringing together real-life customers and energy experts, Enerlytic has developed powerful insight tools facilitating the smooth management of your energy portfolio. The simplification of sometimes sporadic and complex information allows you, the customer, to better analyse and control your energy budget, and in turn, this will help you reduce your carbon footprint. Other notable markers in a distinguished career to date, I've seen Hannah as a global account manager for LG Energy Group, a regional champion of the Female Founders Forum. This is an entrepreneurs network in partnership with Barclays that encourages, supports and promotes female entrepreneurship. In more recent times, Hannah has become an SME member, a council member for the CBI. I'll now hand over to Hannah for a presentation.
Lovely, thank you very much for that. And apologies, technology never seems to work when you want it to. But thank you for the introduction. So yeah, just to go over my background. So set up Enerlytic in October 2020, really to build a software platform for energy users to monitor, analyse and reduce energy consumption and in turn their cost and carbon footprint. I've worked previously with the likes of BlackRock and CBRE on their energy strategies and became quite frustrated with how difficult it was to provide clients with access to their own data. As we move on to looking at reducing carbon, having a good understanding of the data is absolutely key, which is why really we set up the business. If we could go to the next slide. So I wanted to start off with really why we're all here. So back in 2019, the government amended the Climate Change Act to commit the UK to achieving net zero by 2050. You'll have probably heard the terms carbon footprint, net zero dotted around, and I guess a lot of people have asked previously what the difference is between the two. Carbon footprint is the collective name given to the amount of CO2 which a businesses produce and release back into the Earth's atmosphere. Really, it defines the amount of damage that you're doing to the environment. Net zero refers to the balance between the amount of greenhouse gases you put into the atmosphere and how much you actively remove. So when you're adding to the atmosphere, as long as whatever you're adding into the atmosphere is no higher than what you're taking out, you've then achieved net zero. The government's introduced policy initiatives to meet net zero. However, we're currently not on track to meet the carbon budget targets in 2025 and 2030. So there's still a lot that needs to be done there. If we could move to the next slide. We'll have also seen in the news, well, over the last 18 months, really significant increases in energy prices. And we've seen even more increase over the last week with the news from Ukraine. Wholesale gas prices increased by 250% back in 2021. That rose to around 70% in August alone. That was due to supply and demand issues following a cold winter across Europe in 2020. And obviously, we've seen extreme volatility over the last week with the attacks on Ukraine. Just to give you an idea as to the extent of that, on Friday, we saw energy prices exceeding 60% gains across the curve as a result of the Russian attacks on Ukraine. That's 60% in one day. It's such a volatile market at the moment. The invasion of Ukraine by Russia as well sent the oil market soaring to about over $100 per barrel, and we've not seen a market high like that since 2014. We've also seen coal prices increase, looking at further coal supply constraints as well. Coal is now taking front spot to the fuel of choice for Europe in replacement of gas. So we need to just see how that affects net zero plans in the future. With extreme volatility from Ukraine, everything's changing minute by minute. Some suppliers are refusing to price, some are pulling all their pricing books. So it's a really difficult time to look at supply contracts at the minute, just with there being so much uncertainty. You're certainly not going to see a reduction in bills when we look at energy prices. So there's only the only way to reduce cost at the minute is to look at how we can reduce consumption and I guess spread our risk really. If we could just go to the next slide. Are we okay to go to the next slide, please? So just in terms of who pays for the net zero transition, there's several types of cost and benefits to consider. We've got globally and domestically. Obviously, the most important benefit is avoiding catastrophic climate change. The cost of failing to bring climate change under control is much larger than anything we've seen. We've seen extreme weather events as an example. The UK makes up around 1% of global emissions, but when we look at net zero targets, they now cover 2/3 of the global economy. So therefore, meeting the targets, incentivising other countries to do the same, remains the only strategy that we can really look at. And to reach net zero, it's also going to require a range of investments. So looking at investments into electric cars, wind farms, heat pumps, just as a couple of examples, but also adjusting people's behaviour. I was on a webinar not long ago with the Business Growth Hub, and they said kind of between 5 to 20% can be reduced through behaviour. And we've got a couple of examples of ways in which you can reduce emissions by behaviour later on in the presentation. If we could go to the next slide. So there's three overlapping groups who will pay for the net zero transition. So first of all, the taxpayers through general taxation. Second of all, we'll see consumers. So energy suppliers will have costs imposed on them. They will pass these on to businesses. These businesses are also, they are going to have to pass on the cost to their consumers of products. So all of us are going to be paying for this. When we look at the cost of, I suppose, decarbonisation, we will have also seen new charges on our electricity or gas bills. For example, we've seen renewable obligation that was introduced back in 2002 to support large-scale renewable energy projects. Feed-in tariff is another example, a charge on there to reward, compensate and benefit customers who've got access to their own generation and who take pressure off the grid. I think more and more we'll see more charges added on to the bill, which is not really what we want to see with the price of electricity and gas as we've seen over the last 18 months. If we could go to the next slide as well. just looking at, I guess, what is your carbon footprint? So you'll have heard probably the word scope 1, 2, and 3. It probably won't be the first time you've heard it, and it's certainly not going to be the last. Just to cover what those 3 scopes are really. So scope 1 covers the greenhouse gas emissions that a company makes directly. So for example, running boilers, vehicles, etc. Scope 2 are emissions that are made indirectly by business. So, for example, when electricity or energy is for heating and cooling, it's being produced on its behalf. Scope 3 is a little bit more tricky. That's the category that looks at emissions associated not with the company itself, but with the organisations it is indirectly responsible for, and looking through that value chain. So, for example, who are you buying your products for? How is it getting to you? And looking at emissions for scope 3, it accounts to more than 70% of your carbon footprint. So even though it's a bit of a grey area at the minute, and there's still a lot more clarity I think we need on scope 3 emissions, it's certainly something that we need to start tackling and start looking into. If we could look at the next slide as well, please. I've just put a couple of examples here of how to report on carbon footprint. So when we get to a point where you've got a strategy and you've set targets, how can you report on that? So I've split them out into 3 areas: internal, external but informal, and external formal. Net zero calculations, reporting to staff and investors, benchmarking, publishing information on your website, publishing good news stories on your website, reporting to customers, keeping customers in the loop as to what you're doing around the issue. Large businesses now will have to report on carbon emissions as part of their financial accounts, and you will also probably see, and certainly see more of in the future, requests of strategies and information as part of your tender and procurement process. So these are things that we can start to report on in the future. Look at the next slide. And I've split the kind of 4 steps to net zero, really just to give you an overview. Setting your target. So a lot of the guidance is around being able to halve your emissions in less than 10 years, having a realistic target, but still ambitious, I think is absolutely key. But also being able to measure and report. And I think this is just as important as setting a target. There's no point in setting a target if you don't know where you are today. So having a baseline of where you are today, then you can easily track where you are against your target, and being able to measure that on an ongoing basis, keeping stakeholders up to date with the information through reporting. And then looking at reducing your business emissions. So I would start looking at what I would call the low-hanging fruit. So energy efficiency, can you put anything in place today? Looking at renewable energy, can you move to a renewable energy provider? Can we look at cycle to work schemes? Can we start incentivizing staff to look at their own emissions? And collaborate with your supply chain. Everybody will be in this together, and through collaboration we can do great things. So start to speak to your supply chain. What can we do together? What projects could we work on potentially, and keep them up to date with your strategy. I mentioned earlier on in the slide that as part of tender processes, procurement requests, you will need to keep them up to date with your strategy anyway, if you want to do business with them in the future. Move to the next slide. And why should you measure? So again, I've just split them out into 4 areas really. So save money, helping identify your business activities. By using a lot of energy, it can help you reduce energy and resource use. Generate new business. If you're reducing your costs, you're going to be able to be more competitive, bringing new customers. But also if you're looking to reduce your emissions, consumers seem to go towards businesses that are doing things for the greater good. So you can also bring in new customers on the back of that. Meet the information demands of your customers. Again, it's becoming an increasingly important element of the procurement process. So it's really important that you're keeping customers up to date, you're keeping shareholders up to date, staff up to date with what you're doing, and do your bit. Understand the contribution that you're making to your business. shout about it. You know, we're all in this together, and if we can share things that we're doing as a business, hopefully it can incentivize other businesses to do the same. Could move to the next slide. And then just splitting it out even further, so understanding net zero. I mentioned having a baseline of data to make informed decisions. It's so important to measure where you are today, because if you don't know where you are today, you're never going to be able to track how far against your target you are. Identifying the key impacts that you can make. Look at your current operations. Is there a way to improve your current operations? So have an audit of your premises, engage your workforce, collaborate with your supply chain. What other improvements can you make? So I mentioned the low-hanging fruit last time, earlier on the slide. What things can you do today that's really simple and that you can put in place to start reducing your emissions? If we look at any sort of energy management, there may be an upfront cost for LED lighting, but further down the line, there will be that payback. So start to look at, okay, what can we do today? What do we need a strategy for? What do we need to include in our budgets for the next 3 to 4 years? So start to put a plan in place. Build on current processes. So I mentioned kind of enhancing your policies, and build a green reputation. Look at integrating sustainability into your processes, into your tenders, to influence any new suppliers that come on board, to influence your current suppliers, and implement that strategy. So set your target, set out a plan, and monitor the progress there as well. So just looking at the questions to consider when tracking reducing emissions. So these are the things that we need to start asking of ourselves, asking of our supply chain, asking of the business. So which parts of my organisation do I need to collect data from? How can I start to track that? Where do I need to get that data from? How can I track my emissions over time? Do I need to look at software providers? Is there someone that can help me track my emissions over time? Is there someone that we need to work with going forward? What do I need to report? So having a real clear understanding of where you are as a business, go into those 3 scopes, start to list what is covered in those 3 scopes, and how can I report on those? How do I set my target? So there's plenty of businesses out there that can help set targets. We've been working quite closely with Bays over the last couple of months, and they can certainly help point you in the right direction in terms of how to set a target and what we need to be looking at. If we go into the next slide. And just a couple of top tips. So I mentioned behaviour as just one example. We've talked a lot about the measurement of emissions, but how can we start to reduce that? So just a couple of things that we can start looking at today, and a lot of it could be common sense, really. So we'll start off with the internet. You know, we've moved into a digital world now. Looking at the pandemic, everyone's working remotely. We're using many more digital apps as we are today, Zoom, Teams. A digital footprint alone, or the internet alone, accounts for 3.7% of all greenhouse gas emissions. These figures are looking to double by 2025. So it's a huge number there. Just kind of drilling down into looking at the internet and things like that. So 4 grams of CO2 for a standard email, 1.76 grams of CO2 just looking at a web page. Now, I know we're all guilty of Googling it. See if you can ask a question. See, instead of Googling it, why don't you go to somebody and see if they know the answer? There might not need to be a need to open a web page. It might be that someone can give you the answer there and then. I was talking to someone the other day, and they were saying that one Google search is the equivalent of having a 60-watt bulb on for 17 seconds. So these do add up. I mean, I don't know how many Google searches I make every day, but it's certainly more than one. So these are just small things that we can be doing. You know, sending an email. Do we need to send an email to say thank you to everybody? You know, there's 4 grams of CO2 just to say thank you. We don't have to do that. So they're small things that we can look at. If we could look at the next page as well. And just some other top tips, and all of these will we could look at much more specific tips depending on your own industry, but just a couple of high level really. So heating and air conditioning, they're huge consumers of energy. If we could look at the improving insulation, looking at windows, do they need replacing? Think about implementing dress code policies. You know, people wearing smart but they're not cold, they're not warm enough, you know, is there something that we can do around dress code? Looking at EVs, so obviously they're much better for the environment in terms of the output of CO2. On average, they are 3 times less, it produce 3 times less carbon when being driven. So it's a great investment for any business or anyone that owns company cars. LED lighting could deliver savings of around 80% of your energy. Cycle to work scheme, I mentioned last time, the average person that makes a typical car commute of 4 miles could save 0.5 tonnes of CO2, and that's around 6% of an annual carbon footprint by switching from car to cycling. Minimise the amount of waste from your products and packaging. Most production processes contribute to carbon emissions, reducing the amount of packaging you use, reducing all of that, looking at recyclable materials. The SME Climate Hub have some really good tools that can also help, so it's worth checking that out. You can break that down into individual industries. So if you want to look at much more specific data in terms of how we can reduce emissions in my industry, it's worth checking that out and having a look. If we could look at the last slide as well, please. And just finally, just to the importance of data. I mentioned earlier on setting a target. It's so important for us as businesses to start looking at targets and striving for what we can do in the future, but we really need to start measuring that. So the saying goes, you can't manage what you can't measure. Having a baseline, capturing all of your data is absolutely essential, just so you know where you're starting from, and you can start to look at your progress over the next couple of years. So I hope that helps. I'm on LinkedIn, so if you want to follow me on LinkedIn, I'm more than happy to have kind of conversations separately. But I hope it's given you a couple of ideas anyway.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Excellent presentation, that, Hannah. I'll just sort of check my notes. So I don't see any questions that have come in just yet from the floor. So I've got a couple of filler questions, and obviously, hopefully, we'll get some thoughts from some of our people that are attending today. What types of business will what you do for your actual business itself? Obviously, I know that was sort of a bit tapered down, but just to talk about you and your business, what's your targets? Who's your preference to work for, and what your skills and tools can actually assist in the best way?
Yeah, so our system can support businesses of any size, really, that just want further insights into their energy data. So we've worked a lot with kind of multi-site organisations that want a better handle of their kind of group portfolio, single site manufacturing sites that just want to understand their consumption data better as a baseline to say, okay, this is how much we use, this is how much it's going to cost us in the next 12 months, and what can we start to do? So we've got a big partner channel of companies that can bring different solutions based on your consumption profiles, so we can really start to drive that energy consumption down and further reduce your cost and therefore your carbon footprint.
Fantastic. And in terms of sort of time and installation, if someone was to call you up off the back of this event, so to speak, have you got sort of a test case about how intrusive or unintrusive it actually is to integrate into your business?
Yeah, absolutely. So I can have a chat offline. It's all dependent on what they want out of it, I guess. But certainly more than happy to have a chat.
Yeah, fantastic. Just to scan my little box. So yeah, sorry everyone and yourself, Hannah, it's still with me. I've not had anything in just yet with the Q&A, but I've jotted a few things down. What would put off an SME from your experience, and what can you do to debunk those fears?
I think from speaking to a few SMEs, there's a big concern around funding, where what funding is available to start looking at reducing emissions. As we've seen, as I mentioned earlier on in the presentation, energy prices have significantly increased. It's going to impact any business. It's going to impact us all at home. It's going to impact all of us as all of our businesses. And then being told to invest in certain technologies to reduce emissions, some businesses just can't even think about that at the moment. So I know that's a big challenge that SMEs face. That's something that we've raised quite a few times with BEIS, and it's just something that we need to keep an eye on in terms of what grants are available, what funding is available, and it's still, I don't think there's enough support at the moment out there. So I guess trying to work on the things that maybe don't cost as much, or there's no kind of initial investment that's needed. There's still things that can be done. So I would say that's a big challenge that SMEs have, rightly so.
No, that's good. I suppose it's, as you say, I use the term low-hanging fruit. I know it's a favourite of mine as well. I noticed it in the presentation, but it's like you say, if people can't afford to put the big ticket items in, but it's about getting your house in order first, and this is one of the first steps to actually getting your house in order. Before, there's no point leaving all the windows open and putting the most efficient heating system in. You need to know how you're building and how you are operating, don't you?
Absolutely. And just to add to that, we've been working with BEIS on hosting a couple of events across the UK. So hopefully we'll be able to get much more clarity as to the government stance on supporting businesses on net zero. So if you add me on LinkedIn, hopefully I'll be announcing a couple of events across the UK over the next 5 or 6 months. So that might be something that we can add onto those events.
Yeah, no, certainly that's really good, and we piggyback onto that. Obviously, the benefit that it would have to our client base and online and events stretches further than the EDRF remit. So the more people that are involved, the better. Obviously, something that directly helps our clients would be fantastic. So yeah, we'll be looking out for that ourselves and looking to share for you. Just one that I didn't write down, I've noticed from me at sort of the intro notes, is anything that you do on the SME Council for the CBI, is that related to anything that you do sort of day to day, or is that just a different business function?
More of a different business function, although, and I'm very new to the CBI, so I became a council member. I've only had my first council meeting that we had last week, and it was talking about challenges that SMEs face in business in general, but there was a big focus on net zero, so I think it's on everybody's agenda, and one of the concerns there was that the funding that was available, that was one of the points that was raised. So I guess it will, I think the more and more discussions we have, the more and more it will crop up, because it is, like I say, it's on everybody's agenda at the moment. So yeah, it's certainly something that I want to drive as part of the being part of the CBI, and just to get feedback from other SMEs in terms of their challenges. I've mentioned a couple of challenges there, but if there's any challenges that any businesses are facing at the minute, I'm more than happy to bring that along to the council meetings and raise that as a concern.
Fantastic. So it's going to be a lot less like a Parkinson interview now, because I've got a little red flag in the Q&A, so I'll just bring that up. This is from Simon. So the government is promoting the installation of heat pumps, but as an industry, we believe they're very inefficient from an electrical power perspective. What would you advise, Hannah? Is that something that's in your sphere and your remit?
It isn't, but I can certainly point him in the right direction of someone that is. So if I could take his email address, I'll see if I can get some more information on that.
Yes, we saw that when people have logged in, so I'll just jot a note down so I don't forget. So we'll have all that covered from people that have signed it, and then we can signpost people over. If anybody else wants any emails or further chats, by all means, if you let us know in the chat, whether you would. And Simon, if just GDPR, if you let us know that that's okay, then we'll be able to pass your details on to Hannah, and she can speak to you or link you up with someone a little bit more appropriate to answer your question, if that's all right. So let's say, well, I've just got a couple more while we try and maybe get a few more from the floor to drop in. So in terms of targets, because I thought it was a good slide and it was well raised, I speak to people, friends who are outside the remit of this programme, and obviously it's something that we're getting more and more of, particularly since COP26, in terms of targets and how people should set them, and they sort of feel a little bit panicky, basically. It's always going to be on a case by case basis, but I try and allay people's fears and say, well, if you look at big institutions like councils or Electricity North West, and then large companies, not all of those companies, but some, such as Brewdog and others, I can't think of anyone off the top of my head at the moment, but I know Brewdog have led the way in terms of hitting and smashing targets very, very early. But what is reasonable for companies to aim for in terms of their reduction targets?
I think one of the I think it was the guidance from Bayes actually was to look at reducing your emissions by half in the next 10 years.
Yeah.
I think if you were to strive towards that, that's ambitious, very, very ambitious, but it's still, it could still be achievable. So I think that would probably be the base. But obviously, if we look at, there's plenty of companies out there that can look at science-based targets, different types of targets. So I think it would be down to what you want to do as a business. But certainly that as a general rule, if we could all aim towards that, I think that's sensible. Anything that can be done, I think, is better than nothing.
Yeah, no, it's perfect. I like to say it tends to align with what I try to advise people, is that obviously we're in a fortunate position where we're obviously helping people meet these targets, and obviously we're sort of seeing what other companies and other entities are doing. I think people definitely want to do the right thing, but sometimes they get a little bit sort of jittery about how to go about it, and
yeah.
A lot of media and sort of political discourse is the wrong word, but it's the one I'm going to use. A lot of media and political discourse is you'll find that everything's done in big numbers.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
that obviously does scare people. And I suppose it's about breaking down and showing people that there's incremental changes that can be made, that can support. They can support that journey to reducing and actually make it. It doesn't look like something the size of the yellow pages they've got to tackle in.
Yeah. But it's also very common that businesses shout and scream about they've got targets and we're going to be net zero by 2030 or whatever it might be. You ask the question, okay, where are you today? I don't know. So it's how are you going to know whether you've hit your target if you don't know where you are today? So it's just so important that you start to track, start to measure your data, start to collect that data, understand that data, because you could have done a really good job and you wouldn't know because you didn't know where you were at the start of that journey. So it's so important to start capturing all of that data to enable you to get to that point, and really break it down as well. So looking at those three scopes, break everything in your business down to those three scopes. See, okay, out of those, what can I start with? What can I achieve today? Is it just a case of saying to staff, right, as of tomorrow, you all need to come in with a jumper, or it's now policy that we don't need to start sending out thank you emails, so what I would call irrelevant emails. People might think I'm rude, but I know I'm trying to do my thing to save the planet. But there's certainly things that can be done today that don't cost money. It's just a change in, like I said, a change in behaviour. There will be things that do need investment if we want to get to a point where we are hitting our targets further down the line. But they might be things that because of how high energy prices have been over the last 18 months, that we say, well, we can't do that this year, but we might be in a place where we can start looking at in 18 months. So just get everything out, map everything out, see what can be done today, see what can be done in 18 months, see what can be done in 3 years, and really start to get a strategy in place and a plan in place.
No, that's brilliant advice. There's one that come up, and I've got a couple of red flags. I'll just finish mine off before I bring in some of the questions from the audience. One before I forget. So on your list of things to look at to tackle in terms of reduction, you had EV vehicles. There's a very good. Hopefully we'll try and get it out. We'll put it on our social media channels. There's a very good informative video from the Guardian in the last few days about EVs and about sort of getting your head around sort of the use and operation. Stop short about resource and the mining and how long the batteries will last, etc. But in terms of using an electric vehicle, it's a very good video. Also on our YouTube channel, we do have a couple of videos, I think, relating to electric vehicles and how that would affect you as a business in terms of what their cost and tax implications are, which is really quite helpful. So you'll be able to find those, and that's with Keith Fleet, someone who's done talk specific for us, just like you're doing today, Hannah. Last one from me before I get the last couple from the floor. Are you okay for time? Yes.
Yeah, no problem.
No problem. It's just the inclusion and the data gathering from supply chain. Is there any tips or tricks or hints that can sort of, again, it's one of those things that can initially feel over-facing. And there's another link that I can post to the audience as well. Post this via our channels and email email follow-ups. But what would you say is the best way of trying to tackle those relationships and starting working out how best to get the data, or how raw you start off with the data, rather than, again, you don't want that big book of yellow pages worth of work to do on your first day. What are the tricks and tips to actually lead in and bend the will of your supply chain, as well as not making it too difficult and convoluted?
Yeah, it's a tough one, because I think everybody's in the same boat. Everyone will want to get the same data from their own supply chain. So whoever you're approaching, they're probably approaching somebody else. So I guess my advice would be to collaborate. If there's a lot of data at the moment is just built on assumptions, and it can be quite a dangerous game to just assume everything. So just work with your supply chain, see how you can get the data together. It might be, it might not be an overnight thing, but it's just try and work with them a little bit closer to make sure that the data that you're gathering is as accurate as it can be, and try and avoid making too many assumptions. I would say, but it is a difficult one. And I think in terms of, I think scope 3 is just still very much a grey area. I think there needs to be much more clarity on what you need to include as part of scope 3, what you need to report on as scope 3. It seems to be a big beast, and it's the biggest, with it's been about 70% of your emissions through your scope 3. It needs to be addressed, and it's something that we've raised quite a few times with BEIS, just to have more clarity, because everybody I speak to and mention the word scope 3, they laugh and say, I don't have a clue. So I think it's quite a common challenge at the minute, which hopefully we'll all have much more clarity on.
Yeah, there's a good webinar. It's something that people would have to sign up for, but I'll pick the link up, and it's on about scope 3 type stuff. It's pretty much along the lines of what you said there, but just in a bit more detail, because they've stretched it out over the full presentation period. But yeah, it's exactly as you've said there. You've got to do your best. You've got to not assume assume as little as possible. But you've also got to be realistic. One thing to sort of align it to that is, although it's not particularly scope 3, when we're getting people's transport data, which can be scope 3, sometimes they've not got the infrastructure in place to actually record transport data. So we really do take, in that initial carbon footprint, we take a bit of a finger in the air set of results. Yeah. The recommendation is, right, now you know that we're going to need this type of information, set your practices and processes in place to actually start recording this. So I think there is room for assumption, but you don't want to dwell on that, because, as you say, it becomes pretty much guesswork. And in terms of continual improvement and reduction, if you're not improving the flow of data that you're getting, it just doesn't happen, does it?
Absolutely. And there's plenty of tools out there, and some systems may focus on a certain area, like transport, for example, and trying to capture all the data from capture all of your transport data. Others, like where we started out, is just looking at energy data. So I think there'll be plenty of tools that can bring in a lot of data from different areas, and then hopefully as a business we're getting to a point where we can cover all of those 3 scopes. I've seen one of the questions in the chat in terms of, can we capture scope 1 and 3? Where we are as a business at the moment is we're capturing most of scope 2. By the end of the year, we want to get to a point where we're capturing scope 1 and scope 3 as well. So it's something that we're working on in the background, to try and put together a tool that will cover everything. It's a big beast, as you can imagine. So, but it's something that we're looking to do by the end of the year.
Fantastic. I don't think we have any more questions, because you've picked up on the one that went via the chat. So I think that's pretty much it. As I say, if there isn't any further questions, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for fielding all my questions, Hannah, and as well as those that were answered from the floor as well. Fantastic presentation, really informative. Just to let everybody know before we do leave, our events calendar. So if you go onto our Eventbrite, or you scan any of our social media channels, you'll see that the next event is Thursday the 10th of March. And that's the Chamber Low Carbon Innovation to Commercialisation, and that's our technology forum. So you can find that and sign up and have a read of the blurb to see if it suits you. And there'll be a programme coming in shortly for the rest of the year that will be going up, or we'll be announcing what way we're going forward. We've just asked one. So yeah, so slides we don't normally. So just one last question that's popped in the chat. Slides we don't normally issue out. I will obviously I will double check with Hannah if she's all right about that, and then we can let you know when we do have follow-up emails with you. But we will have this back up on the YouTube channel, so you will be able to watch the full thing again, and you will be able to see all the slides again. Fantastic. Thank you everybody for coming, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you very much.